Hello, seniors, and welcome to my Chapter 1, Section 4 Notes for Government. And we're going to be discussing today economic theory. So make sure you've got a pencil or a pen, blue or black ink, and paper, and a focused mind so that you can take some really killer notes that you can use on the test. Remember that the notes are part of your grade for the test, and you need to have not just mine, but your own as well for the other sections. So without any further hesitation, let's go ahead and dive on in. Okay, starting off with Roman numeral 1, we're going to be talking a little bit about the role of economic systems. With big letter A, you're going to title this Theory of Economics. So we'll be talking about the definition of economics itself. You'll notice that I have it in red. This is a vocab term. So the chances of this being on the quiz, or on the test, fairly good. You always want to have the vocab written down. So it says here, what is economics? Well, in a nutshell, the definition is study of how limited resources are used to satisfy unlimited wants. Natural resources, knowledge, labor. There is not an unlimited supply of these things. And so each government has to decide how they're going to distribute those things out. And again, we all have unlimited wants. There's not a finite amount of stuff that we want. It's unlimited, but the resources are not. So how we distribute those out, every government's going to make a decision on how they do that. There are three basic questions in economics that each governmental system has to address as it deals with the distribution of those resources. What and how much to produce. So it doesn't matter if you're communist China, United States, South Africa, you've got to figure out what you're going to produce. Is it going to be butter, guns, cheese, refrigerators, Cadillacs, whatever, and how much to produce. Are you going to produce a ton of cheese with just not a lot of bread, or as it deals with automobiles, a ton of this type of car but not this? So each economic system has to answer those questions. Once those goods are produced and you've decided what to produce, you have to figure out how should goods and services be produced, essentially figuring out with your labor, how should you produce? Should it be produced with this amount of labor, with this much? Should you use machines? How is it you're going to figure out how you're going to produce those goods? Okay. The third question is, once you've figured out what and how much to produce, and then you've also figured out how those goods and services will be produced, is who gets the goods and services. Every economic system has a way to determine who gets the finished materials. All right. In lowercase c here, we talk about societies with more political freedom have free, unregulated economies. So it makes sense. The less governmental restriction there is from the government, that the economy will mirror that, and the economy will have much more freedom in what to produce, how to produce, of answering those questions. When the government gets more into it, all of a sudden the economy becomes much more regulated by a higher power. Letter D here states that societies with less political freedom have economies under more government control. So again, take a look at China would be an example, Cuba. So would any other government where if you have like a dictator, a totalitarian regime, or an oligarchy where the government makes a lot of the decisions, because there's not a lot of political freedom in those countries, the government reflects, I should say the economy reflects that. All right. Moving on to Roman numeral 2, we're going to start talking about some of the actual specific economic systems. And so here we're going to start giving some information on capitalism, which is the one most of us are familiar with. Okay. So in uppercase A, we see here another vocab term. Definitely want to write this down. And a simplified definition, and here it is. Capitalism is an economic system in which freedom of choice, individual incentive, and business enterprises are emphasized. So a high degree of choice, meaning, again, you know that when you go to a store, if you're going to buy a soda or a bag of chips, that there's endless choices there, from Coke, Pepsi, Mountain Dew, RC Cola, you name it, and there's an abundance of choice. Individual incentive, and we'll talk about that, and the fact that there's an incentive for people to participate within the economic system because there's a chance to make a profit. And again, the choice, having the freedom of choice and variety helps. And business enterprises are emphasized. So again, it's about private business. Okay. So another vocab term coming up here, we've got free market. And what it says is the government places no limits on the freedom of buyers and sellers to make economic decisions. We do not have a free market system. Most market systems out there are not. In fact, there's no free market system that exists. It's theoretical, but to have no limits whatsoever, there's no country that has that. So some have a very low government intrusion, but others have, and others could be higher. But when you have no hurdles at all, no roadblocks in the economic system from the government, that is what we call free or pure market system. So let's talk about the individual who came up with the idea of capitalism. Adam Smith, he's a Scottish philosopher, 1700s. He came on the scene right around the Industrial Revolution when mercantilism was happening. You had Britain making a lot of money on cotton, and the idea of trying to have open markets throughout the world, getting the raw materials and then selling those finished goods from the raw materials back to the places they got the raw materials from, having those markets, that kind of thing. And the acquisition of wealth is when we see capitalism come into being. And his ideas were articulated in a book which is very well known. So if you take any economics classes, you'll probably read it. It's called The Wealth of Nations. A lot of economists still read it today because it's pertinent to our current economy. I don't need to read the whole book to you, but let me just bring out the important points here. The idea, he stressed laissez-faire economy, little no government involvement in the economy. So the idea that you don't really need government involvement and that the economy will take care of itself, that there's this, quote, invisible hand that will guide the markets to go the proper directions. An example being that if a good is too expensive, people won't buy it, and the market will adjust for that. Either the company will go out of business or the price will go down. Another example is that if a company sells something that is hazardous or can kill people, let's say that Toyota came out with a car that killed people whenever somebody just bumped the side of it, kind of thing. Well, because the car is considered a death trap, nobody would buy it, so Toyota would have to change its ways or go out of business. So the invisible hand would essentially make corrections within the market system, and you would not need government to do that. So laissez-faire literally in French means like hands off. Keep your hands off and keep the government out. Okay? All right, so moving on here to lowercase c. Again, it's stressing that idea of the invisible hand. Again, would guide economic choices for the best possible results. A free market would fix any and all problems. And it's an interesting philosophy. Those that have more libertarian views about government involvement would identify with this. And it does make sense to a certain extent. For a government, you'll notice that when there's less government interference, some of the best ideas come about, and with little to no restriction. think of all the new ideas that came about with the internet when it was new to the scene. There hadn't been laws written yet, so a lot of really interesting things come out. There was the good, there was the bad, and there was the ugly. So you're going to get all of those things. But somebody who is a free market capitalist would say, get the government out. It has no place in that because it stifles innovation, it stifles incentive, and it convolutes the process and takes away from the economy living up to its fullest potential. It's a very interesting idea, and so those that believe in keeping the government out of the economy, that's not a new idea. Adam Smith was the guy who came up with this back in the 1700s.